Okay, the effects of material progress. George says that the primary distribution of wealth is dual, not tripartite. That capital is but a form of labor, like skilled and unskilled. I think there were other economists who said it's like congealed labor. Here's my hypothetical territory, and there's the subtraction equation. Now we say that wages and interest are going to be $6 a day because $6 a day is what you can produce on average on the best land that is free. And so everybody has to pay 6, but on the best land that yields 9, of course, after wages and interest are paid, the landlord gets 3, and 8 minus 6 is 2, and 7 minus 6 is 1. Now, the next thing you know, more people come to this hypothetical territory, and wages and interest go from 6 to 5 because now the frontier has been extended to inferior opportunities. And now wages and interest on all land become 5, and the rent becomes 4, 3, 2, 1. The land that had offered no advantage offers an advantage of $1 a day. But something becomes possible that is not possible when one family is living in isolation. Before you know it, somebody says, hey, I just built my own house. I'm getting pretty good at this, and I've accumulated some tools that are good for building houses. And if anybody wants a house built, I can build it for you. And I'll exchange that for food. And somebody else says, I'm good at making clothes. I'll just keep my time making clothes. Maybe if I can get enough customers, I can buy a sewing machine. And so people start to specialize. And before you know it, somebody decides that they could teach everybody's kids at the same time. Instead of everybody taking time when they're tired at the end of the day to tutor their kids, they could chip in and hire a school teacher. And the more people come to the community, the more divisions of labor that are, come about, and the more tools and machines that people can accumulate for each type of work. And the longer they can put those machines to work each day. So what happens to productivity?
It zooms.
Productivity goes up, and I've just decided to double the productivity in the model. The specializations of labor, the accumulations of tools, and so on, productivity doubles. And now on the land that yielded 6, I'm sorry, the land that only yielded 5, we've doubled productivity, and it yields 10, which is more than 6. Wages and interest went from 6 up to 10. And on the best land, the rent went from 3 to 8. So then I want to consider inventions, and somebody invents the reaper and the thresher and the steam engine. I'm really going to town here, the railroad, and all these myriad of little inventions, innovations, discoveries that increase productivity. And so does the infrastructure. We built a bridge across the river and the swamp, and roads that connect the agricultural community to what was the best crop land, but is now the center of a little village with the blacksmith shop, the general store, the post office, the veterinarian. Now productivity doubles. With $36 a day on the very best land. The capital is now in buildings, machinery, inventory, instead of capital for farming, but the same dollar value that yielded $18 before on the best land yields $36. And the greater productivity increases the demand for land. So we are building bigger buildings, and they require more materials. We're using tractors, and that enables us to farm much larger areas of land, and we can raise beef and pork and so on, but it takes 5 times as much land to grow this better tasting food than it did to just grow grain and for making bread and cereal. So the frontier extends to less potentially productive land. And here it is on the little graph. Again, the increase in productivity more than compensates for the extension of the free land opportunity. And now $16 a day can be produced on the average where on the best land that is free. $16 for wages on all land because the free land yields $16 a day on average. And the rent on the best land goes from $8 to $20 a day. So it's not only increasing as an amount, it's increasing faster than wages and interest, and it's becoming a larger portion of what's produced. As wages and interest are becoming a smaller portion of what's produced, the rent of land measures that portion of wealth which is socially created by the presence and the cooperation of people as a whole. Now, I'm going to go back over it for Win, but here it is again. Population increases and the frontier is extended to inferior locations. But cooperation, specialization, and trade more than compensates for the extension of the opportunity, and productivity doubles. So now $10 a day results on average from the best land. So wages and interest go up to 10 on all land, and the rent of land goes from 3 to 8. More inventions and infrastructure increases productivity, but the greater productivity increases the demand for land and extends the free land margin. Wages and interest go up to $16 a day, but the rent on the best land goes from 8 to 20. You with me now, Win?
Yeah.
Oh,
Thank you.
good. I thought that would be okay if I just went
Yeah.
on. I mean, okay. So the question, of course, is what actually creates that value of land? And George says it's the presence and cooperation of people. And so you say, well, does the infrastructure enable this denser population?
In part.
Yeah, it enables it. I mean, without roads, without sewers, without bridges, we couldn't have as dense a population. But it's if the people don't come, then that's another story. But so it enables the people to come. But it's still the people who create the value of land. And even taller buildings enable denser populations. And so I've often thought about Manhattan. What would happen to the density of population in New York, in the city of New York, if the land was marsh and couldn't build more than 2 or 3 stories tall? What would happen to the density of population?
Would become much lower.
It would be much lower. And so there would be less specialization of labor, economies of scale, stores would have fewer customers, subways would have fewer passengers, and the value of the land would fall. I've even thought about 9/11. Supposing half the people got scared of living in New York and somebody was telling them there's going to be more attacks. It's not just the World Trade Center. We're going to attack all in New York City, and people moved out of there. If half the people left, of course, you could say that the demand fell for New York, but why would the demand fall? Well, I shouldn't say why would the demand fall, but you could say that the divisions of labor and the economies of scale, the fact that there would be half the people there to cooperate would be the real basis for the fall in the land value. Productivity would fall.
Yeah.
So think about the first settlers that came to our hypothetical territory. When they first got there, they worked hard and they produced $9 a day. Now, the same amount of work, the same amount of capital, even though it would be a different type of capital, it would be able to be the same amount, yields $36 a day. And if you can get somebody else to supply the capital and do all the work, they get $16 a day, and you, because you own the land, you get $20 a day. That's pretty good, isn't it? So the question it would be, how much land would you have taken if you were one of those first settlers? Would you have taken just as much as you could use for yourself?
Absolutely.
Or would you take as much as you could get? And of course, we know that that's the history of the United States. People acquired as much land as they could. We all think about George Washington. It turns out he was the largest landowner in America, with holding title to more than 1 million acres of land. But it wasn't just Washington, it was Jefferson, and even the good Benjamin Franklin, who was involved in land speculation in the Ohio Valley. And lots of people have said that was one of the big reasons why they wanted to secede from Britain, because the British government said no settlement west of the Alleghenies. So we're right where Pittsburgh is. No, couldn't go that far west. The British government didn't want to send the army to protect the settlers. And so they said, well, then what good is if there's no settlers, nobody lives there, what good is our owning the land out there? So they say that was the fur trade, and I guess the international trade were the three big motivations for independence.
Yeah, but the quote unquote foresight of the people who acquired the land far beyond what they could actually do anything with at that time. Yeah.
Right. And going back much further to the colonies and so on, so starting, I guess, even as far back as 1603, is that Jamestown?
Right. Yeah.
All these original colonies, and the king basically parceled the stuff out, and he retained the title to them. And the people who lived here, well, they didn't count because they weren't Christians. So he said, the divine right of discovery, we found it, it's ours. Just like I discovered this restaurant in South Philadelphia. They discovered the land in America, it's theirs. And of course they had the guns to back it up.
And they wrote the laws to back it up.
And they what?
And they wrote the laws and
such. Yeah. That kind of like the golden rule. Those that have the gold make the rules. Yeah, they wrote the laws and backed it up. And
now we're looking at a lot of Supreme Court people who talk about originalism.
Yeah. That's a good irony, isn't it? I forgot what I was going to say. Oh, I know. If you were to trace the title to any piece of land in the United States, it goes back to somebody who claimed it. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, and you go to court and you say, well, I have the title and I got it from him and he got it from somebody else. And it goes all the way back to the King of England claimed that land. The way I discovered the restaurant in South Philadelphia. All right. So suppose that just 1 out of every 4 parcels of land was held for speculation. And we know that it isn't just land that's held idle. It's often, and more often, underused. In the 1950s, when I was a kid, every city had a drive-in movie theater. And nowadays, every city has self-storage units. And when they decide to finally develop the site, they put them on a truck and go to the next place while the land ripens. And here we have buildings that are 100, maybe 150 years old, some of them. And they were never replaced with taller buildings when that, as the taller building would have been the highest and best use, putting the site to its potential. And every city has surface parking lots. Even Wilmington has surface parking lots in spite of all the parking garages they have. When we could see that a high-rise building with hundreds of offices and apartments would create jobs and housing. So in our little subtraction equation, I've held 1/4 of all the land out of use and prematurely extended the frontier to that last block. So it not only extends the frontier and drives wages down, because now only $8 a day will result on the best land that's free. But then it drives the rent up. And of course, as you push people off that land that's held for speculation, you reduce the results of their labor and capital. So land speculation not only pushes the margin, but it reduces productivity, reduces the aggregate production of the community. It wastes the infrastructure. The people, and you've got to build the roads and the sewers and the water mains past empty and underused lots. And so, of course, it makes the infrastructure much more expensive to build and maintain. Now, there's no free land. What happens to wages and interest? Without free land, those with the least skill and knowledge, what do they get paid? I come to you, Tom, and I say, I need a job. And you say, great, I'd like to hire you. I only pay food, clothing, and shelter. Oh, gee, I can produce a lot more than that. Well, yeah, Mike, I know you can, but what's your alternative? Oh, there's no free land out there, huh? I either have to work for you or somebody else, and you say, well, there's another guy wants a job too. Okay, food, clothing, and shelter. Now, what about the skilled workers? They have no free land to go to either, but as long as there's more people wanting to hire them than there are skilled workers, obviously they're going to be able to command higher wages as people are bidding against each other to get them. And having a certain number of skilled workers is going to increase your productivity and their profits. So they're going to have to pay me more for my special skill. And as the more I get paid, the greater the incentive for other people to learn those skills and to increase the supply of skilled workers. So what we can say is that the wages of the least demanded worker falls to that point below which productivity would fall more than wages were lowered. The skilled workers, their wages are going to be whatever it takes to keep them working at maximum efficiency. And so wages and interest taken together are going to fall to that point below which productivity would fall more than wages and interest were lowered, and then land would, the rent of land would fall. And that's as far as it can go. Now, wages of unskilled and skilled workers, and how about interest? When there was free land, of course, you could take your sheep and put it out, your lambs, and put it out on the free opportunity. And after you paid the shepherd, the increase in value that was left would be yours. But now there is no free land. And so you either have to lend your capital to a landowner or rent the land from a landowner to put your sheep out there. And of course, so the rate of interest, just like wages of skilled and unskilled workers, falls to that point below which the supply would not meet the demand. I've often thought the interest that is the return to capital in the corporate world would be aligned with the bondholders of corporations. When a corporation makes a lot of profit, they don't share it with the bondholders. The bondholders get whatever they agreed to when they bought the bonds. It's the stockholders who are basically the landholders, and the bondholders are like the capitalists. Now, of course, that's not exactly right. Lots of corporations own the capital as well as the land. They don't have bonds that equal the total value of buildings, inventory, machinery. But I think that's much closer to what we're talking about here. Now, today we have a lot of pretty low interest rate, not today, before inflation hit. Starting back when the recession hit, remember interest rates were about 6%, and then we had a recession and they lowered interest rates. But as they were lowering interest rates, inflation went from 3% to 0 for 1 year. So interest stayed really, the real rate of interest was 3%. But in the years after that, we had inflation came back a little bit, 1%, 2%, that kind of thing. So we had really low interest rates up until, I guess you'd say, right up until this last couple of years. It wasn't even much more than a year ago when inflation really started to spike. And so I don't know what the interest rate is now, but if you subtract inflation, you get kind of an idea of it. But anyway, low interest rates seem really good, and we've had them since the recession. And it really is good when you're buying a car or you're putting an addition on your house. But what about low interest rates when it comes to Social Security? You pay into it for a lifetime, and when you go to collect it, not so good. Now, the government, I think, pays 2%, even though they're selling bonds for like 0.5% or 1% or something. I think they're still paying the Social Security Trust Fund 2% interest on all the money that they owe it. But nonetheless, low interest is not really good for Social Security and retirement accounts. And next week, I'm going to talk more about how low interest rates raise the value of land, the selling value of land. But I'll wait until then. All right. So what I want to say is, if you're taking wages and interest together, and if that point below which productivity would fall was $3 a day. So in order to get 36 produced, you got to pay wages and interest of $3. And in order to get 32 produced, you got to pay $3. That would put our rent at 33, 29, 25, and so on. Now, once we get to that point, now this is the natural tendency. Of course, we intervene with minimum wage and forced contributions from your employer and all kinds of interventions and redistributions of wealth, like the earned income tax credit. But the natural tendency, of course, is for wages to fall to this amount below which productivity would fall. And once it does, it doesn't matter how much productivity increases, everything that's produced in excess of this amount, which we've just arbitrarily picked 3, goes to rent. And I should always add, and other monopolies. So that's, to me, the limit of the speculative advance of rent. Whenever any reduction in wages and interest would reduce productivity more than wages and interest were lowered, it would lower rent. And that's got to be the limit to the speculative advance. Now, Henry George, in his ability to find analogies or parables, he says, put 100 people on an island from which there is no escape. And whether you make the one the owner of the other 99 or the owner of the island makes no difference to him or to them. They are his slaves. And so basically, that's where we are today. And we've intervened and we've done all kinds of redistribution. But the basic relationship for people who do not own the land on which they work or the land on which they live are wage slaves. As population increases and inventions replace workers, more land is needed. The more land that is held unused or underused, the more people are unemployed. The greater the investment in the infrastructure and public service, like cities and suburbs, the more people can be employed and housed per acre or per square mile. And therefore, the greater investment in the infrastructure and public service, the more unemployment and homelessness results from every acre of land that's unused and underused. And that's what we see in our cities and our suburbs. And so in spite of the fact that the cities and suburbs only occupy something like 3% of the total land area, or maybe it's 10% of the arable land, but that's why the unused and underused land that we see in every city, it causes enormous numbers of people to be unemployed and homeless. Now, I'll get to the interventions and the minimum wage and redistributions. Even public education is a redistribution of wealth. And I'll get to all those things in the weeks to come. But next week, I'm going to focus on the selling price of land and the cause of depressions and recessions. And of course, George was writing in 1879, which was 5 years after the worst depression in the history of the world at that time, an international depression, which came in 1873. Here is the map of the United States in 1794. And you can see there's Canada up here, and the United States is this little part right down here. And all of this, including what's now Florida, is Mexico. 13 colonies took up 430,000 square miles. And here's how it changed. Louisiana took up 828,000 square miles, or 23% of what's now the United States. Florida in 1821, Texas seceded from Mexico in 36 and became part of the United States in 45. And then in 46, we got Oregon, we took it. And in 48, we got California, Nevada, Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado, and Utah. And in 1853, we took what's now Washington State. 1867, we acquired Alaska. And I don't even have Hawaii on here. In 1848, the Mexican secession included 525,000 square miles, or almost 15% of the current US. Florida, Texas, Oregon, Washington, and Alaska equaled another 1,000,000 square miles. In 1879, when Progress and Poverty was written, the United States only had 50 million people. By 1890, when the frontier was exhausted and officially declared over, gone, the United States had nearly 700,000 square miles of arable land and 63 million people. That's way less than the 98 million people that now live in what was the original 13 colonies. So land speculation, to me, is the only plausible reason why there's no free land opportunity left, and wages and interest tend to a minimum, with a shortage of jobs and housing as a result.